Peter, I have a confession to make. Are you ready?
Oh, good. Yeah, no, of course. Always.
Okay. It's the 4th season, so this really shouldn't be an issue, but my confession is I still get a little nervous every time before we start recording.
Oh, do you?
I wake up and I'm just a little bit nervous. I think it's mostly like performance anxiety, so that's not a bad thing, but it's just a little bit jittery. Do you feel that way at all?
Yeah, I do. Especially like today, I'm coming in so hot. Hot to record this thing. How am I possibly going to be a contributor when I am coming in like sweat prepping?
I was about to say, you said in your text to me, I'm busy sweat prepping, and I'd never heard something so apt in my life. Yeah. Like I finished my preparation yesterday and I still feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. Well, this is good news because guess what? I've been on the phone with a team of French and Japanese scientists. That's not true, but I read an article about it and they have uncovered exciting new information related to performance anxiety. Namely, they've identified the part of the brain that gives you the performance jitters and they may have a way to stop it. Would you like to hear about it real quick?
Absolutely.
All right. Okay, so these scientists gave a bunch of people, subjects, a bunch of buttons to press in different order to complete under stress while lying in an MRI. Now, how do you think they added the stress element, which would be the same as, about to go on stage?
Needle spiders?
Not needle spiders, but electric shocks. We're still doing electric shocks.
What?
It's not just for Milgram kids. Yeah, electric shocks were given when the subjects made a mistake. This year starts with a 2, and we're still doing electric shocks. Anyway,
oh my God.
The scanner showed that the anxiety-related mistakes that were made were marked by activity in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, or the DACC, a brain region whose functions include reward processing and decision-making during motor tasks. And then they went on, in effect, to switch off the the DACC by using, here you go, acronym fans, an RTMS, which is repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, an established technique to temporarily reduce activation of a targeted brain area. Again, it's just magnets, which we've talked about before, putting magnets on part of your brain in order to settle it down. And when they zapped the DACC prior to the performed activity, the subjects made dramatically less mistakes and therefore received less shocks. So we now, if this study is correct, and it's very, very new, the DACC can be the triggering force behind performance anxiety, and the use of RTMS could find its way onto sports fields, before concerts, and before podcasts. If it becomes normal enough. What do you think about that? Magnets, Pete?
I think it's terrifying. Also, probably great if you are, I don't want to diminish if it's helping people, but I have to report, I've done some real-time research, and I'm relieved to say that when you search for magnets, you cannot find them on Goop. And so I know at least where they didn't get their research.
I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon.
Welcome to What's That Smell, a sometimes funny podcast about humans and their anxieties. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Tommy Metz III.
And every week we each drag one of our deepest, darkest anxieties into the light to share it, learn about it,
and hopefully laugh about it with all of you.
Reach out, send us the story of your anxieties to somethingstinky@whatsthatsmell.net. And with that, Thomas, I shall go first. Tommy.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good. It's a pleasure to podcast with you today.
Always.
This is a connection that you and I have that is of great and deep value to me.
Oh.
I just want you to know that. It's important to me. It is. Are you weirded out? Like, it sounds like you have backed away from the microphone.
No, I love that. I just like the idea that one of the things that makes me happiest, as you heard from the cold open, also makes me nervous. That's just a weird, it's just a weird part of my life where I'm like, I'm so excited to be uncomfortable a little bit.
Well, so I have a preamble before I get to my anxiety this week. The preamble is, I do this other show you've been a guest on. It's the ADHD podcast, Take Control ADHD, and so we've talked about anxieties over on that show, and it's been really great. And I was prepping for a show. We had a guest on that show, Dr. William Dodson, whose specialty is rejection-sensitive dysphoria. Rejection-sensitive dysphoria. Do you know what that is? I mean, I know you do a lot of reading.
Yeah, no, I don't. Go ahead. Rejection.
It's something when you suffer from rejection sensitive dysphoria, you could have just said, like, when people neg me, I get sad, and that's really what that is. But when you're living with ADHD, as his research shows that people with ADHD have a much higher degree of sensitivity to rejection than normative folks. That's what the idea is.
And is it harder to get rid of?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. It can cause depressive spirals that are, and the reason it's dysphoric, it's not connected to depression. It is a non-depressive depression, right? And so it is often misdiagnosed. It's often it's just a crazy thing. Well, I say all this because it's like new words to me. Like that was a new concept to me, and I had never connected it with something that I have personally experienced before, right? Like that put words to my life experience in a way that I haven't been able to express. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely.
I learned something. Just talking about it, I learned something about how I live and engage with the world. And that was super powerful. And since then, I have noticed it in so many people that I'm around, right? I notice it when it's that experience when you see someone who is effectively taking ownership of a hurt that is not theirs, right? They just feel rejected, and so they take ownership of it, and then they get sad.
Oh, yeah.
So days go by. That's not what I want to talk about today. I want to set the stage for rejection-sensitive dysphoria, for the thing that I feel like is related that came up like another couple of days later. A podcast shows up in my feed. Do you ever listen to the Ezra Klein show?
No, I don't know what that is.
Ezra Klein is a journalist. He's on MSNBC. He's a lib.
Right.
I love Ezra Klein. I think he's a smart guy, and he's one of those another one of those journalists who has said, you know what, my show on and now he's on Vox actually now, and so he is. Like he said, my show is the stuff that I want to talk to people about that I never have time to talk to people about when I am doing other stuff, like other traditional media. So I just want to get guests on. I want to talk for a long time with them about things that are important to me. And this episode popped up, a conversation with former U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy. Sharing stories of the communities that he visited as Surgeon General across the United States, talking about issues like addiction and obesity and mental health. And the podcast ended up not being about any of that, right? It was about the number one subject that most people wanted to talk with him about as he visited their communities. Can you possibly guess what that subject is?
No. Well, rejection?
It's actually pretty close.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
It is loneliness.
Oh, they want to talk to the Surgeon General about that. Wow.
Well, get a load of this. This is fascinating. I did, I started searching, so I opened up the Goog, and I said, loneliness is, right? Because I love the safe search response or the smart search responses. And these are the top 5 searches for loneliness is. Loneliness is killing me. Oof. Loneliness is a serious public health problem. Loneliness is such a sad affair. I think that's a song. Oh, okay. Loneliness is cleanliness. And I don't know what that's all about.
Yeah.
Loneliness is not a phase.
Oof. Loneliness is behind you right now. Loneliness!
So I got to thinking about it. I said, and how does loneliness impact me, because it clearly impacts a lot of people. In fact, 55 million people, that's double the number of people who have diabetes in this country. That is more than the number of people who smoke in the United States. They say that they suffer from loneliness. Loneliness is vastly underreported because reports suggest, multiple peer-reviewed studies suggest, that people who have or are suffering from loneliness, if they see the word lonely or loneliness in a survey, they will not report it. They see it and they think, oh, God, well, that's not me. But in fact, that is. And so UCLA had to adapt an entirely new study called the UCLA Loneliness Scale, which is this validated scale to assess loneliness without using the word loneliness at all.
Oh, wow.
Right? And it is all because people who are living with loneliness, that equates to I'm not worthy of being loved.
Sure.
And why would you want to admit that out loud?
Right.
It is crushing. And so I found myself like, oh my God, I'm drowning in woe right now. And I realized, I think that's it. I think that really, some of the symptoms that I'm reading about describe things that I have attributed to, imposter syndrome, which we've talked about on this show. And I think the anxiety that I'm dealing with, like I am worried about being lonely and falling into the trough of loneliness as a result of some of the choices that I've made in my life and career that I think that I am feeling right now at this stage now, that I think I could be struggling with.
Yeah. Well,
so there's a lot of coulds and shoulds and woulds.
Sure.
I regret that, but
I'm not surprised, but I would have thought that having a family, like a wife and children, would help with a lot of that. I don't have either of those things. That's why I guess I was asking.
I am really glad that you said that, because it is an important thing to note.
Okay.
That being surrounded by people who love you and care for you, as in your family, is not a barrier to loneliness. And in fact, Murthy says in this podcast, which I thought was fascinating, he said some of my loneliest times as Surgeon General were when I was Surgeon General. Like, I'm surrounded by people who need me, who need my insights, who are looking to me for guidance. My family loves me and is proud of me, and yet I feel incredibly lonely. This is the lottery winner syndrome, right? I won the lottery, and that was that led to the loneliest stretch of consecutive years of my entire life. Right? That's the lottery syndrome, right? Nobody cares about me for me anymore. They care about the money. They care about the story. They care about this outside thing. And it leads to, they bought a big house. They bought a big house that has a big yard, where the houses are separated from one another by this physical barrier of space. And now no one, like, there is no community anymore. There's no community anymore. I find that fascinating. And here I am as somebody who back in 2007 elected to take my skills and whatever I can contribute to the world and try to do it in a different way by freelancing and starting this podcast business and doing all these things, and realizing that I don't have physical contact with many people anymore. And that, it turns out, leads to the biochemical sort of dimension of loneliness, that when you don't have physical connection with people, with a community, it changes the way your hormones work.
I guess that makes sense, but I never would have thought of that.
So before I get into the physiology of loneliness, you, as you said, you don't have the family, you have foster, who's awesome.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, how do you feel about that? How is your community? Does this strike a chord with you?
It definitely does. And actually right now, even more so than usual, because two very dear friends, two of the people that I was closest with out here and have been for a really long time, have just left. They are moving from Los Angeles to Minneapolis. It is a great step up for them, both professionally and personally. Their quality of life is skyrocketing because, a dollar here is, I guess, $19,000 in Minneapolis. I don't know. They're just sort of getting all of Minneapolis in a box. And while I am so happy for them, it is, to be honest, a little devastating. It's something that I've been working with.
It probably didn't help that they left a Post-it on your door that just said, because of you. as they drove out of town.
That was weird. That was weird that they said, I asked for their forwarding address and they said elsewhere. And I was like, well, seems a little vague. But so that's something, I mean, it's not like I'm losing them as friends, and I'm definitely going to be visiting them. We already have vague plans for me to visit early next year. But that idea of things moving on, to zoom out a little bit, I have always had a fear of ending up alone in some sort of way, of doing something. I mean, a lot of that has to do with maybe my fear of conflict, that this fear of abandonment. For some reason, it's like another me was abandoned at one point in his life. And I don't remember ever being that person, but that is definitely that fear of loneliness, and doing everything that I can to try to counteract that, which gets harder and harder as we do grow older, and people do have families and kids, and their lives sort of take on different directions. It can be a lot of work to try to stay current and connected with people.
Well, connected with old friends and relationships is one. The other that I find I struggle with consistently is building new connections. And I know we've talked a little bit about that on the show, but I think that this plays into it, right? Which is this idea that as a 40-something man, it is a challenge for me to have the time and space and who the hell am I kidding? Charisma to go meet new people that want to hang out with me, and that's a fascinating place to be, because I've always I never, like, when I think of myself, my self-image is not one of being a guy who can't meet people. We talked about social anxiety and how I'm not great at parties, and I'm realizing that so many of these things kind of play into that, but also I know how to speak to other adults. I can do that when I have to. I have made the conscious choice not to do that for so many years that I worry that it's become that it can habituate. And
that it actually atrophies a little bit?
Yeah,
sure.
That it atrophies. Sure, don't you think? I mean, that feels like that's kind of a natural outcome. Absolutely. And so that leads to this sort of the physiology of loneliness, like what happens when you are lonely. Like, it turns out, as you will likely not surprise you at all, there is a very old reason for us to experience loneliness, right? Loneliness, it turns out, it's that forced sort of biological reckoning in favor of community to keep us safer from saber-toothed tigers.
Right. I was about to say saber-toothed tigers. Yeah. It always comes down to saber-toothed tigers.
It always comes down to saber-toothed tigers. Absolutely. Because, it's the thing. It's that thing that reminds us that we are unsafe. Our hormones, our adrenals, these help us to respond to threat. And they're on call when your body is under stress. And when you become lonely, sort of chronically lonely, when you believe that your worth and value is deflated, in the very old days, right, when we were first discovering what it means to be a community, to emerge from the caves and build our first, small communities, villages, etc. Like, we do that to keep us safer, so that someone is going to take watch, someone is going to help us with food, someone is going to help reduce the stress of living alone. And so when you put yourself aside from communities, you're increasing the stress of living alone. You don't sleep as well. Your hormones are constantly pegging you to wake up and look for the saber-toothed tiger outside your door. You're constantly at a state of alert. So it's not that you think, I'm not sleeping well. You might think to yourself, I sleep fine, but you're really not sleeping fine. You might sleep the same number of hours, but you're actually sleeping terribly. You have what they call micro wakenings, right?
Oh, I know about those.
Right. So you wake up and then you go back to sleep. You wake up, you go back to sleep. That is not a restful state.
So you get a full 8 hours and you still feel terrible.
You still feel terrible, and you're disconnected. You're constantly in a state of fear. And finally, in our modern era, you ask yourself this question, maybe not literally, maybe not explicitly, but you're thinking at some level, why would you possibly want to connect with me? Because, again, I am not worthy.
That's the thing that when you said that it's physiological and the loneliness sort of pushes, are you saying that the loneliness then pushes you to be with other people?
That's the intention.
That's the intention, because the problem is, I feel like when you feel lonely and you whether it's consciously or subconsciously, you go to that next thing of that I'm not worthy of it. It really can compound.
It really can. And
it really can get worse and worse. Yeah.
I wonder if that biological, that physiological response, back when we were dealing with, as early humans, Homo sapiens, apes with clubs, if that experience of loneliness was one that was a reminder that we need to go be with the community. And today, there are so many distractions, cultural distractions, technological distractions, that experience of loneliness is one that just feeds on itself, right? It's a snake that eats its own tail, because our brains are just wired for other things to give us attention and not to go get community. Like, we don't think immediately, I'm lonely, I guess I better go hug someone. We think, I think I'm just going to go turn on Twitter and see what the world is doing.
Right.
And so they term it, so it's called social scarcity, right? That it becomes harder and harder to ask for help, to ask for sort of friendship. It puts the focus inward, right?
Yes, I can I'm sorry to interrupt, but I can very much relate to that. Going back to away from loneliness, but very connected to it, anxiety. The first thing, one of the things that I've really learned over the last couple of years is when I'm having very bad anxiety to absolutely reach out. And it doesn't have to be, hey, Steve, who are you? I don't have any friends named Steve. I guess I wouldn't say that, but I would say, Steve, get out of my apartment. I would, because the first thing that my anxiety tells me to is, you're weird right now, so definitely don't reach out to anyone, because you won't be yourself, and then they won't like you. And that's why I like to put a face on my anxiety and call him a real jerk, like that weirdo Steve. Instead, I've learned I don't need to call my friends and say, hey, I'm really anxious right now. I can say, what are you up to? Or anything, just to get out of my own head makes me feel that other people are the answer for me. And I've really finally learned that now that I'm 40.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that gets to, this idea that you have the power to decrease social scarcity, right? You have the power, but it becomes almost emotionally impossible to do it when you're in a state of chronic loneliness. And this is different from solitude. They make a very clear distinction from solitude versus loneliness, right? Solitude being the state of being alone, which is not troublesome to the individual. That's introversion, right? That's taking an introverted moment.
That's hammock time.
Yeah, hammock time, right. It's okay. That's okay.
Right.
And, speaking of the dangers of technology and social media and their relationship to loneliness, yes, there are some connections that you can find that make social media dangerous.
Yeah.
And it, according to Murthy, I really like his perspective, which is it all comes down to intentionality versus unintentionality, or sort of unconscious use of the tools. If you're using social media to plan a group, to organize a group online, to build relationships, to build meetups, to build a business, like all of those things are pro-socialization. Even if you're not physically with somebody at the time you're using them, it's pro-socialization. There's a reason to be doing it.
Sure.
And ideally, hopefully, that leads to real physical connection as a result of your use of these tools, versus long scrolling on a drunken Friday night.
Wait, doing what?
Just long scrolling on a drunken Friday night,
like, is that
where
what
you're
that's
just
called?
sitting
Long
down.
Scrolling? I like that.
Sure, you just go, because it's the never-ending feed. You just keep swiping. Sure. I feel like I'm teaching you terms today. This is
I really appreciate it. Yeah, because then that turns into an anxiety hammock. See, now I'm teaching you terms. Who's the captain now?
Oh, man. You are, because we need a new product, the anxiety hammock, in the What's That Smell anxiety store. Oh my goodness, we're going to get the team working on that right away. I don't know what it is, but I know it has a speaker in it, and it's reminding you that nobody is sitting with you in the hammock.
How sad. It's just the sound of crickets. Crickets shushing each other, because even they don't want to be a part of it.
Yes. That's a home run. That is a home run. I feel like this is one that hit me pretty close to home.
Yeah.
And I just want to read this final passage from the podcast. Loneliness isn't simply painful, it is lethal. Several meta-studies have found the mortality risk associated with loneliness is higher than that of obesity and equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So Murthy, in his time as Surgeon General, decided to label loneliness a public health epidemic.
Really?
Term that medical professionals do not throw around lightly.
Oh,
there you go.
Man.
This is a big deal. This is a big deal. So if you are not lonely, go hug someone who is. If you are lonely, accept it. And this has made me rethink so many of the opportunities that we have on this very show to talk about, and I'm a big advocate of giving yourself permission to do something that feels good and feels right and feels true to you. You don't want to go to the reunion, but you feel like you have to. You don't really have to. You could choose not to go to the reunion, but honestly, maybe you should ask yourself first if you need to go to the reunion. Maybe you need to give yourself a hug. Maybe you need to give yourself a hug. That's weird. That is not a thing you should do because that doesn't cure loneliness at all.
That's you're just like, that's a straitjacket fantasy camp. If you're hugging yourself, you're just pretending.
Lonely. Is that loneliness debating? Is that a thing?
It is now. This year in anxiety, Pete, going back into history is a terrible idea. And here's an example. Growing up can be a confusing and very anxious time for kids, and as a result, parents are always on the lookout for ways to help calm their child's minds. And in the 19th century, the cure for anxious children came in the form of what was called soothing syrup. And like all things back in the olden days, the ingredients were horrifying. For instance, the very popular Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup for children had 65 grams of aspirin in it. Wait. Did I say aspirin? I meant pure morphine. Mrs. Winslow's was a huge hit for a zillion years. Finally, it went off the shelves because in 1910, the New York Times ran an article exposing this death molasses and a bunch of others like it for containing, as I said, morphine, codeine, heroin, and chloroform. So, you know what's the worst? The past.
Here's something that might improve your day. It doesn't contain morphine at all.
Oh.
It's audible.com. Audible is a fantastic sponsor of this show, and they are going to give you a free book. And, I've been talking about loneliness, and it makes me reflect. It makes me think about some old relationships I've had with old instructors and teachers in my life. And I realized, if you haven't experienced this tiny bite-sized little read, you should probably pick up Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom. It's like a 3-hour
book? I've heard of this book.
It's a great little book. It's just a little kind of inspirational experience where it's a story of Mitch Albom, and he has this chance to rediscover a college professor and how he sort of uses his time with this older man.
Oh, that's Maury?
Who knows he's dying. Yeah, Maury, what was his Maury Schwartz, I think. Maury Schwartz. And so he gets to visit every Tuesday, and they get to kind of share and rekindle this relationship, and they're all sort of lessons on how to live from the perspective of this guy who is dying, and I think loneliness plays a big part of that. Like, how do these people kind of heal one another through their kind of end of life experience? So Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom. It is available in Audible. It's only 3 hours and 42 minutes, but you're getting it for free, so you don't have to do our usual per minute value calculation.
Good
so
point.
You can take a look at that, or you can take a look at any of the 180 some odd thousand books that are available to you. You can also get a hold of the new Audible Originals, which are custom, wonderful, like bespoke to Audible productions that are terrific. Audible is an incredible value. Again, I've been a member for almost. It's been 20 years? If it's not, it should be. 20 years. It's been a long time.
Yep.
Hundreds and hundreds of books. Every one of them is terrific. So audibletrial.com/scent of a podcast. What you do when you sign up there for a new account, you get the free account. You get to search for the free book, Tuesdays with Maury. I don't care. You can do another book. But you also are directly supporting this show when you do that. If you always wondered, hey, how could I support this show?
Yeah.
audibletrial.com/scent of a podcast.
Going up, Pete, I'm very excited about this next part of the show because I have another listener submission.
Oh, outstanding.
All right. Here is what he wrote. Dearest WTS, I live in New York City, which means that in the course of a normal day, I spend a fair amount of time in elevators. Leaving my house, I take an elevator down 9 floors. Arriving to work, take the elevator up 10 floors. When I go to the doctor's office or pick up my kid from preschool, elevators are always involved, which makes the anxiety I'm writing about such an issue. For you see, nearly every time I step out of an elevator, I have a brief but palpable flash of fear that as I cross the threshold, the elevator is going to shoot up or down violently, ripping me in two in the process.
Oh, God.
My anxiety has a very particular point of origin. In 2011, a woman named Suzanne Hart was killed getting on an elevator in Midtown Manhattan. A story in the New York Times about the accident describes her getting on an elevator when the elevator suddenly lurched up, its door still open, according to the fire department. It dragged her until she was pinned between the elevator and the wall between the first and second floors. I was living in New York at the time, and I can tell you that the sad fate of Miss Hart was talked about for months. The freak accident of her death sent a chill through the elevator-based community, and I'm sure I'm not the only one for whom the effects have been far-reaching. My anxiety doesn't change my behavior. It's not like I've only started taking the stairs, and I forget about it immediately. As soon as I'm safely off the elevator, and yes, I weirdly only worry about death by elevator when exiting, I move on with my day. But this little fear is always there, waiting, biding its time for me to step off my floor, and then it suddenly reappears in a flash of anxiety. You're maybe about to die, it yells, before disappearing back into the subconscious corner of my mind where it lives. Am I alone in my elevator phobia? Yours, Scott H.F. Lamb. Okay, Scott. Mr. Lamb, thank you so much for submitting. I appreciate it. Pete, fear of elevators. It does not have a specific term, but it's clearly an anxiety shared by many. And one thing I wanted to point out is that fleeting nature of the fear, how it just sort of like flashes then is gone. That brings me back to our very first episode when I talked about my fear of tail strikes in planes. That it doesn't keep me from getting on planes, and I don't think about it. I forget about it all the time until just that first incline, and then I tense up just for a second, and then I'm fine. Now, I wanted to check in with you. How are you with elevators?
Oh, God, I'm hyperventilating over here.
No.
This is it's so funny. I feel like you just rekindled one that's 30 years old.
What's that smell promise?
Oh my God. So, story. I did the first couple of years of my higher education back east and spent a lot of time in New York City, in fact, and rode a lot of elevators. And I think I don't actually remember what the trigger was that made me experience this, but I too felt that deep-seated elevators are killers sensation. I think it's because there are a number. This is like a regular movie trope, like a horror movie trope. Like you get people on elevators and the elevators crush them, rip arms off, things like that, which I don't think can actually happen, but now apparently they can. And so I would do this. Like I was singing with another a cappella group, and we would perform at parties and things. So we'd have to ride elevators up to these party floors to apartments, whatever. And I would do this thing where there'd be 7 of us and the elevator doors would open and people would start getting out and I would jump across the threshold. Not a big jump, but I would just always jump.
Yeah.
And so I was doing this. I did this for about a year. And sometimes it was like super subtle where it would just be like a little hop skip kind of a thing. And sometimes it would be more obnoxious. Like it was like 2 feet, like firmly jumping across the threshold because I thought, well, of course I have to jump because if that will decrease the time in flight across the transom of the elevator. And one day, one of my colleagues in the group who is now a distinguished professor at the Berklee College of Music in Boston. He looks at me and he says, what are you doing jumping over elevators like that? I said, well, I don't like the idea of them moving when I'm crossing it. He says, God, you look like a real asshole.
That's his official opinion.
That was it. And I stopped, like I began like deep work to fix this in myself then, and I haven't thought about it since. And so all of that came just flooding back as you're reading that email. Yes, and now I need to go take stairs, like officially, like all the time.
I'm
Well
sorry
done.
and you're welcome. That's what this podcast should be called. We're sorry and you're welcome. I was hoping that whenever you were in an elevator with your a cappella group, that when the doors open, you would throw one of them first and yell, "Take him!" That would be one way to do it.
Lay down your body.
Yes, your fear of that is you are not alone. If you look up elevator anxiety, I think I heard my Google like moan. Because there was so much. It was just like, oh, there's so much to give you. And of course, it doesn't have to just involve being crushed by an elevator. This is a famous story that maybe you have forgotten about. In April of 2008, 34-year-old New York production manager Nicholas White went out for a smoke break while working late on a Friday night. Taking the elevator back up to his office on the 39th floor, the elevator stopped suddenly. And White was trapped for the next 41 hours. Subsisting only on a pack of Rolaids and by urinating down the elevator shaft. And there's a time-lapse video of all 41 hours available on the internet. I wouldn't watch it.
Oh, God.
He made it out fine. I mean, the rest of his life isn't great, but he made it out fine of the elevator. But yes, that's another thing. The idea of just sort of an elevator stopping. It turned out that it was late on a Friday night. They had stopped all of the elevators for maintenance. And there's split
didn't
screen.
know he was in there?
No idea that he was in there. He was yelling for help. There's split screen with the video that I mentioned of elevator workers in other elevators working on things. They say they never heard and no one was watching the security video. So he was there for all 41 hours. Gross. All right.
Oh,
so
dear.
This, so far, not great, right? So I wanted to look up a little bit of elevator safety. So I went to the source. In 1852, Elisha Graves Otis introduced the first safety device for elevators. You've been on an elevator. I'm sure you've seen the word Otis all over it,
Absolutely.
right? Otis established a company for manufacturing elevators and went on to dominate the elevator industry. Fun elevator fact. The Otis Elevator Company carries the equivalent of the world's population in their elevators every 5 days. So clearly, if anyone knows what they're talking about, it's Otis, right?
One would think.
One would think. So I went to their website to look for safety tips, and there are safety tips. And I was not disappointed because, can I just read you a couple of the tips at random?
Oh, God.
So if you're nervous, this is what to know about elevators. Number 1, know your destination. Push the elevator call button once for the direction you want to go. Great tip. Number 2.
That's a safety tip?
Yep. Pay attention to the floor indicators and be prepared to exit at your destination. Great tip. Here's another one. Enter and exit carefully. Passengers nearest the doors should move first. Dynamite tip. That's mint. These apparently were written by people like who don't know how seatbelts work on airplanes.
Oh my goodness.
Like this is just, those were some of the great tips. And you know what? I'm sorry, I'm a little scattered, but I went into a deep dive about elevators. I'm not going to read you most of the stuff, but can I share one more elevator fun fact? That you might not know about this. This isn't anxiety producing, or maybe it is. We'll see. Closed door buttons in most elevators?
Yes. Are they bogus?
100% since the 1990s. Yes. They have been obsolete since the 1990s, but because we crave a sense of agency in our everyday lives, the elevator makers just keep installing them. They do not affect anything. The elevator is on its own schedule, and that just gives you something to push. I found a Harvard psychologist named Ellen Langer. She says, quote, perceived control is very important. It diminishes stress and promotes well-being. So press away, I guess.
Oh, my
it's doing
goodness.
nothing.
That's diabolical. That is the elevator industrial complex that I knew existed.
I know. Big elevator. Oh, the
Big
worst.
elevator.
Okay. So this was all upsetting. And then I told you about the one part of control that you have is a button that does nothing. But I have some good news. Are you ready to turn it around?
If you can.
For real. Yes.
All right.
Elevators are responsible for only about 27 deaths a year in the United States and approximately 9,000 injuries, according to the Center for Construction Research and Training. And do you want to guess who the majority of these injuries happen to?
Small children and the elderly.
No, see, that would be sad. Instead, the vast majority is maintenance workers installing or repairing elevators or working near an elevator shaft. Those guys are most of the 27.
Okay, now wait a minute, because this is suddenly not like, if I know that as a relationship of total people involved with elevators, passengers, and maintenance workers, 27 seems like a small number. But how many, once you get rid of passengers, how many, like, what does that look like? Because I'm thinking that maybe elevator maintenance worker is not a great career choice.
Well,
depending on the percentage of people who end up dying as a result of coming in contact with the tools.
I didn't do the math that way. That is interesting. I don't know how many elevator workers there are, so I can't help you with that. So anyone who's listening who is also an elevator repairman, we are also sponsored by ZipRecruiter. Find another job, because your job is made of murder. Don't work on murder boxes instead. I did do math the other way, though. For passengers, according to Consumer Watch, it's only about 5 deaths per year, and that's out of 18 billion elevator trips. So that's pretty good odds. 5 per 18 billion elevator trips. Abigail Kunitz, the New York's building department spokesperson, has said elevators are the safest form of travel in New York due to the city's stringent inspection and safety requirements. I did a little bit of research. You remember the sad tale of Suzanne Hart? That building's elevators had actually gotten flagged a number of times for safety violations, and the building was very, very old. So again, the possibility of that happening is really like winning 8 lotteries, the crappiest lottery you can ever win. I don't know why I picked lotteries to do the thing. So again, 5 deaths out of 18 billion elevator trips. You are more likely to be killed by a bear, and 10 times more likely to drown in your tub than to be hurt or killed in an elevator. So
I actually it turns out the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually has this number completely published. And we have 27,000 elevator installers and repairers at work in this country. And that means of your 27 who are dead, that's like 0.001%, right? Like that's
good.
Very small. So
okay, good.
It's
all right. So yes, it's more likely, as I said, to be killed by a bear or to drown in your tub. So take heart and take heed, WTS listeners. Just, if you want to stay safe, never take a bath when you're in an elevator. And if the door's open and there's a bear in there, take the stairs.
Try to catch me howling at the moon.
Thank you all so much for joining us for this episode. Today's tune is Howling at the Moon by Tomer Katz featuring Viggs.
What? All right. Coming up next week.
The toilet. Definitely the toilet.
No, it's not the toilet. Look, the answer will never be the toilet.
Well, it sounds like somebody was traveling with a bird of prey, right, and they needed to get out. If I don't order room service, how can I look like a Hollywood after party with the Wilson brothers? Like, I just don't know.
Until then, I'm Tommy Metz III.
And I'm Pete Wright. Thank you for downloading. We'll be back next week on What's That Smell? My kids do that. They come in and they actually lie sideways. They lean their face first, right in my sound panels.
Do they really?
They like the feel. Yes.
I would
it's like
100%
sensory
do
stimulus.
that too. That's funny.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. And I saw a building in New York that I wanted to lick because it was like candy colored. And there are certain types of blue and purple that if it's a jewel or a rock or a building, some part of me really wants to give it a little lick. I don't, but.
Do you know what's great about that? is that we've already pushed record. And I think that may be the most precious and delightful thing you've ever said to me when you didn't think we were recording a show. So, thanks.
And I want to lick buildings. All right.